Hello, my name's Nick Park and welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. We are covering a series called The Biblical Game of Thrones. We're looking at the kings of Israel and Judah, and we're seeing how, despite all the very human politicking that took place among them, that God overruled what was going on to bring his purposes to pass. And today we're looking at Ishbosheth. Now, to be honest, I think a lot of people, when we looked at Saul in the last lesson, would be expecting us to move on to King David, because a lot of people think Saul was the first king of Israel, David was the second king. But that's not actually the case. The Bible tells us that Saul's son, Ishbosheth, came to the throne after him, and he ruled for about 2 years. Now, he was not the son that Saul had wanted to take the throne after him. That would have been Jonathan, but Jonathan was killed. And so Ishbosheth became the king of Israel after Saul. And his name means a man of shame. I don't know why Saul would have given his son that name, but actually it turned out to be very apt, because he was a weak person and lacking in authority. He reigned for 2 years, but it was more as a puppet king. The power behind the throne was Abner, his military general. And Abner was waging wars against David for those 2 years. And there was a struggle taking place, a civil war within Israel to see who would ascend to the throne. And Abner fought against David, and Abner was he was the power that was keeping Ishbosheth on the throne. And then Abner and Ishbosheth fell out. They had a falling out because basically Ishbosheth accused Abner of sleeping with one of his concubines. And so Abner tried to go over to King David, and there were some negotiations, and it all went wrong, and Abner ended up getting killed. And after that, we're told that Ishbosheth was afraid. He was terrified now that the military man that had supported him was gone. Why? Because he was a man of shame. He was a weak man. He was a foolish man. He had no leadership ability of his own. And eventually he ended up being murdered by his own people. And it was after that that David would ascend to the throne. Now, what can Ishbosheth teach us about the ways of God? Quite simply, it's this, that there is a difference between positional leadership and real leadership. You see, a lot of people think leadership is about being given a position, whether that's a position in politics or whether that's a position in the church or whatever. And people want a title, and they think that the title will give them authority. Sometimes the title means so much to them that people in a position that have positional authority won't even allow you to address them by their first name. You've got to use the title for them. You know, I remember years ago, I was in the Salvation Army and I was saved from a life of alcoholism. And there was this man who was coming to speak in the hostel for the homeless where I was. And to those of us who had come out of that background and given our lives to Christ, this guy was a bit of a hero, because he had lived the same life we had, and he had ended up becoming a Salvation Army officer, a minister. And so we really looked up to him. He gave us hope for the future. And so I can remember when he walked through the door, and I'd heard all about this guy, and I was so pleased to see him. And I said, "Hi, Davy." And he came over to me. He said, "Don't you ever call me Davy." He said, "You call me Lieutenant." And then he gave his second name. He said, "Don't you ever forget it." I said, "Okay then." And to be honest, after that, I never had reason to address him, because I lost all respect for him that day. Because this man I had looked up to, I realized that he was relying on his title to bolster his authority. And I was still a very new Christian, but I knew that that isn't the way God does it. You see, you can have a positional authority without having an authority that comes from character and true leadership that causes people to actually acknowledge the leadership and the work of God in your life, not because you've got a position, not because you've got a title, but because God has got his hand on your life. And I pray that today God will demonstrate his hand on your life. You might have a position, you might not. You might have a title, you might not. But I pray that today you will walk in the authority that God gives to his children. May God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.